Work-life balance. It's at the top of everybody's list of desirable career benefits. Now, the Naveen Jindal School of Management offers students help on how to plan for this in their own lives. A podcast, formerly called the Yet Another MBA GOAT podcast, greatest of all time, naturally, has been rebranded as Between Business and Life. An MBA student today, a balanced professional tomorrow. It's another way that the Jindal School seeks to prepare students to become effective leaders in their future roles. The podcast offers new episodes monthly, featuring thought leaders who have achieved success in their careers, as well as an excellent work-life balance. Each episode is designed to equip students with the knowledge of business trends while inspiring them to manage both business and life. Now here's Lisa Shatz, Assistant Dean for the MBA programs at the Jindal School. Take it away, Lisa.
Hey you guys, welcome to our next episode of Between Business and Life. Today we have Sam Satyanathan, who's here. He is an alum of the full-time MBA program at UT Dallas and the head of product security at Freddie Mac. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
So the topic of the day is cybersecurity. I spent a little bit of time today learning the difference between cybersecurity and software supply chain security. So talk a little bit about those two and if they're interchangeable or if one falls under the other, because I know they're very closely correlated.
Right. When you're talking about cybersecurity, you're broadly talking about security across the board, information security of any sort. Whereas when we talk about software security specifically, it's focused on the business of actually building software, which pretty much runs everything today. And again, drilling down further, we talk about software supply chain security. If we can think about something like manufacturing supply chain, where you have raw materials, vendors who are involved, you have other tools or products that are part of that process, and then finally you get a packaged solution that gets made into a product. So end-to-end business of building software involves the supply chain of not just people building software, but a lot of things that are involved in that process. So this specific topic is all about really securing that supply chain end-to-end.
And so when you build it, I think people like me that don't have a lot of experience would picture a whole bunch of coders in a room typing out code.
Right.
But that's actually a pretty small part of the entire supply chain.
Exactly. And, especially with the idea of agile development, all of that coming into focus these days, the difference is that it's not that somebody builds software and then you have a product, but there are a lot of steps involved in that process. So if you take it from the start, you have some tools that you use in building that software, something like a Visual Studio or some kind of integrated development environment. You now add third-party code into there. So typically some kind of open source libraries or other things that you add to the software. Now, at the end of that, you have the code that goes and sits in like a source code management solution without maybe going too technical. And then beyond that, there's a build and deploy process. So there are build tools that are used, and then there are solutions which actually store this package solution, which we call artifacts, which then get deployed into production. So there are all these different steps along the way. Any of these steps could be compromised. Right. So ultimately, that's what is going to cause a problem in anything that we build and deploy.
And I assume it's more likely to have a problem if the more pieces are not coded by your own people. The more you use something that's open source where someone else kind of knows how your code is already written, or something that has a third party involved.
Right. So this is where about, I think, 98% of all the software that's built out there uses some type of open source or third-party libraries as part of it. The challenge is these are openly available for anybody to look at and maybe tinker with and figure out that there are some vulnerabilities in that library that's being used. So if you, as a company that builds software, are using some of these libraries and they have these vulnerabilities in them, they can be exploited. And somebody who wants to actually compromise your solution can figure out that you are using those libraries. They have a way to exploit them. A good example of that is the Equifax breach that happened. They were using struts a package called Struts version 2, and it had a known vulnerability in it. Apparently, they hadn't patched all of that in time. So what happened is somebody was able to get into their systems and actually be in their environment for a long, long time and exfiltrate 150 million people's personal information.
And that's just one type of kind
Exactly.
of weakness. So I read that Gartner said 45% of all organizations will have some kind of issue or attack in the next, I can't remember what the time frame was, but not a big time frame. So that was one example. What are other examples of the way the software supply chain can be attacked? And what are the goals? Like, obviously you hear a lot about ransom. So there's a clear goal to that. Someone attacks your computer or a company's computer and says, you have to pay this much.
Right.
And so it's all about getting that money back from the company or from the individual. What are the other attacks that you're looking for, and what's in it for the people who are attacking?
So I think, again, I'll go back to the Equifax example. That's probably a good example of why somebody's trying to compromise your software supply chain or software in general, because their ultimate goal is probably going to be just exfiltrating your personal data. It could be your PI data, personally identifiable information, PCI data, which could be, again, misused for other purposes. The major difference with ransomware is that ransomware is more about somebody getting access to your system through something like a phishing attack, and then now they're going to essentially encrypt all of your systems. So now you cannot get access to anything. The way they make money is really by making you pay for it, to give them a key to decrypt all of that information back to what it was before. And there is really honor among thieves. Those guys are typically good about keeping their word too. So if you pay them, they would actually tell you what they did and what you need to look for and actually provide you the key to decrypt all of that. Or the option is not pay them maybe a few $1 million and just try to go back to maybe a previous state that you had that was not compromised by ransomware and try to restore to that state. So one is more direct. The other one is somewhat indirect in some ways.
Well, it is nice to know that the thieves are honorable. I respect them for that, although I think they could have a better line of work. So
They make a lot of money.
I bet they do. So what's the future of that? Are they going to continue to make a lot of money, or do you see in the future where this will become a less viable kind of means of making a living as companies get more sophisticated, or perhaps the government gets involved? And I know there's some kind of law that pertains to this. Maybe you can talk to that as well.
Sure. Yeah. So I think to address the first part, right? Ransomware, I don't know if it's going to get better. What that means is security is everybody's business, right? We have to be careful about what links that we click in the emails we get, because that's typically how ransomware attacks start. And the reason I said I don't know if it'll get any better is because now there's ransomware as a service. There are ways you can actually get someone to provide you that service if you're someone who wants to do it. And the way they do it, at the end of it, they clean everything up after themselves. So there's no way to track them either. It's gotten into this big business.
It's quite a business model.
Yeah. But software supply chain, yes, this is a major concern, right? We talked about third-party libraries, but there are other points within the software supply chain that could be compromised. As I was talking about, like it could be the plugins that you use within your build pipeline. It could be your source code repository or source code management solution, which is where you put all your code. It could be your integrated development environment. So any of these points could be compromised. And so the one way, at least the administration now is trying to address it to an executive order, is to publish something called SBOMs, which is essentially a software bill of materials is what it stands for. What it provides is basically an inventory of everything that goes into your software in as much detail as possibly. And there are some standards that are built around that as well. Again, now the challenge is how much of it do you publish? How much, are you going to openly share it with everybody, or are you going to somehow restrict who has access to that? Because if you are a company that's in the business of providing software as your product, then now you have to worry about this being published to somebody who wants to hack your product, right? So we should have some strict controls around that too. But the The administration's order specifically says that anyone who wants to do business with the federal government or its agencies, they will have to start providing this.
So you are a busy man and have basically that responsibility for Freddie Mac on your shoulders. And somehow, I hear you talk about your wife, your kids. You contribute here. You're a mentor for the full-time MBA program and do things like this. So talk a little bit about, through the years, how you've managed to have this level of success and also managed to kind of make sure that it isn't everything that defines you.
I think it's sometimes, I feel like, we all learn as we grow and grow older, obviously. I would say starting out, it's all about just working. I remember like early on in my career where I would, just work nonstop for 15 hours. Again, I was a technology guy, so it's not unheard of. But I think once you have a family and, kids, you have to prioritize your time because that's the most important thing. And if you have kids, most of you who have kids will know this. The only really valuable thing you can give your family or your kids is really time. So how do you manage that? And how are you able to disconnect from things that you do for work and focus on the other more important things in life? For me personally, I think some things that I took to heart is over the years, I've gotten laid off twice in my career. And those were really great opportunity to kind of reset and kind of reassess what's most valuable in life. And I think we talked about this before, Lisa, about how I work 100% from home now full time. So it's a bigger challenge to maybe disconnect because, you have access to work anytime you want. So now you have to intentionally disconnect at the end of the day or make sure that you're not logging into work or trying to do things for work over the weekend. That's definitely helped me.
But it's a challenge.
It is a challenge. It also depends sometimes on your managers. I've had managers who are, probably not very mindful of that and maybe reaching out to you over the weekend. So that makes you have to go back and look at those things. And company culture sometimes makes a difference too.
This episode is brought to you by the UT Dallas MBA programs, top ranked nationally and in Texas. The UT Dallas MBA combines a robust core with 13 concentrations. You have an option to add a second master's degree. Your choices for that include 5 STEM designated programs. The MBA program has full-time, part-time, online, and other formats. They give you flexibility to fit your MBA education into your busy schedule. The skills and training you will receive are exactly what top employers are looking for. For more information, visit us online at mba.utdallas.edu.
I really like what you said about it's important, but it's more important at different phases of your life. And I struggle with this because, I work with a lot of 20-somethings, MBA students, and I respect them for being so focused on, I'm going to make sure I'm well-rounded. I'm not going to give everything to a company. And I agree with that from an overall arching kind of philosophy of your life, but your life is a long time.
Absolutely.
What I don't agree with is you have to take it down to every year has to be like that, or every week has to be like that, or every day has to be like that. Because the truth is those first roles that you have in your career, sometimes it takes more than the 40 hours that a lot of people have in their mind is how much you're supposed to give. And I also think by thinking like that, you're limiting yourself.
Right.
So, I'm like you. Like, I am very intentional about the time I work. And, my kids are heading out to college. My last one's leaving soon. So these last couple of years, I've been much more intentional about spending time with those kids that will not be home anymore. And it might be that 2 months from now, I go back to not being as protective of my time.
Right.
But the time that I spent in my early career, where I really did probably work way too many hours, they paid off in exponential amounts.
Right.
Because I learned a lot in a short period of time. I built a reputation for myself. And I invested 5 years or 10 years or whatever. But that has been, when you do that early, you have many years to benefit from that.
True.
So it is really true what you're saying, that you can have a well-rounded life, and it doesn't mean every day is well-rounded.
I absolutely agree. And it's also the kind of opportunities you select, right? I'm less than fortunate to be in a profession where there's a lot of demand, especially cybersecurity specifically. So there are roles that probably are 60, 70 hours a week type of roles, could pay a lot more money. The question is, do I want to take them on at this point in my life? Maybe there are interesting things to those roles and maybe a higher sense of satisfaction, some things that I might do with them. But I always have to keep that in mind when, even if I'm looking for another job, I have to be careful to make sure that I'm not taking on something that'll, again, back to something we were talking about earlier, involves a lot of travel or something where I'm spending a lot of time toward work that I can't do the regular things with the family.
And maybe it's not a yes or no. Maybe it's a now versus later.
Right.
I think you have, 7 or 8 years left before your last kid goes off to college. Maybe that's a more logical time to be doing that than now.
Yeah, and I think there's value in other things too, right? Like you were mentioning, doing the UTD MBA mentorship program, being actively involved in some of these, even industry events and things like that. If you are working that many hours in a week, you don't have time for any of those things. All you are doing is your day in, day out. So back to being balanced, right?
Yeah. And you can also make the argument that those things all help you in your career, right?
That's
it
true.
helps you to know people outside of work. It helps you to be involved in industry. It helps you to be involved in the university where it's bringing talent that you will ultimately be working with. So all of those things are helping in both sides of your goals.
I think we should be constantly learning too, right? I think through all of this, like the mentorship program, I think is a great example. I feel like every time I interact with people who are new in the MBA program, I'm learning something new. They have a completely different perspective on not just life, but work and things that I do every day as well. The same way, if you have enough of a downtime, it's not just you're using all of that toward your family. You could probably read. You can know what's going on out there in the industry or the specific area that you're working in. I do see a lot of people, even within cybersecurity, who are not up to date on what's happening out there just because of the fact that they are putting in so many hours just toward work.
Yeah. They're outdating themselves.
Yeah.
So getting back to cybersecurity, we talked about it. Freddie Mac is a huge organization, and they have resources to hire folks like you and to do all that. But the same demands and the same things are needed at a small company level.
Right.
So talk a little bit about a small company that has a pretty lean IT group, but still has customer data out there and still has software that they have to build. How do they do what you do without being part of a bigger organization?
Software security is different from information security in many ways, that it does need the active involvement and support from the rest of the technology organization, the engineers, the software developers, people like that. So even in my role, what I do today is work proactively with the software development organization across Freddie Mac. So if it's a smaller organization, let's say it's a 50-people engineering team, even if you have just 2 or 3 security folks, there is a way to kind of scale without really hiring more people by trying to educate security as it pertains to software is slightly different from what you would typically see with what normal people may need to know about security. Like you have the standard security awareness training and things like that most organizations have. But software security is knowing about security and keeping that in mind as they're coding and working through the software supply chain, as we talked about. So educating them, trying to get them to think of this as something that's critical to what they do every day is a way that you can help. But information security as a whole, a lot of the smaller organizations, what they do is also they find ways to get some kind of managed service that can help them with that. So they don't necessarily have to scale internally, but can get these people who can scale as needed, depending on what's required.
Okay, that makes sense, because my next question I don't have to ask now. I was going to say, so as a customer, I want to use a big company, not a small company, but it sounds like in some cases those small companies will be as secure.
Yeah, I think, historically that was a challenge, but I feel like now most of these services that you see in the information security space can be acquired for, even small companies by using that as a service as opposed to establishing that program within that company itself. So I think there's more awareness around that, and there are companies that offer this as a service, knowing that, let's take the example of maybe, some of these financial fintech companies, right? They don't all have like the same infrastructure or resources or people like the large banks. What they do is a lot of times outsource this to a company that can actually provide that service. And so any of the certification or standard processes that they need to follow is managed by these people, and they are experts in that area.
Right. So let's take it even smaller. So me as an individual, I have bank with the big banks. I've got the apps on my phone. I've got VPN. I've got McAfee and all that kind of stuff. So as an individual, and I'm looking at what companies I can work with that are going to keep me the safest and what tricks I need to make sure that I'm not duped, what should I be looking for?
The Apple ecosystem is pretty safe as a regular user. And they have done a really good job of protecting personal data. Anything you have, keeping them patched and up to date is probably the best thing you can do as an end user customer. Be it your mobile devices or tablets and their operating systems, or if it's your browser, making sure that you update the browser. Because typically if it's a Chrome or something that you're using, on the top it'll say update. Mm-hmm. It'll show up, right? My advice is, as soon as you see it, update it. The sooner you do it, the better.
Yeah, I'm particularly paranoid about anything like our finances, and so I do have a bank app, but we actually intentionally set up another bank where we put more. Like, this is just the funds we need for now. Our bigger amounts are in an account that I don't have an app for, and I don't have any online access to. So I'm guessing on the back end, even though I think I'm safe with that other one, on the back end, they probably have my data somewhere that even though it's not on my phone, it could still be.
They have some strict controls in place for that too, right? Like banking companies have, like the PCI DSS standard is something governs any company that uses credit card information. Banks typically are regulated, well-regulated. Your money is safe because of FDIC, which insures it. And I think we talked about this before. If it's a pain in the butt, but if you can enable multi-factor authentication in anything you use, that's ideal.
Yeah.
It's a little harder, but it definitely helps.
Yeah. So I guess the general rule is the harder it is for us to get into our own stuff, the harder it is for them to get into our stuff.
Even harder for them, right?
Yeah, even harder. So I'm always looking out for my MBA students, and I know some of them are IT type folks, and they're trying to go into areas that they know are going to be pretty fruitful for the short term at least. And clearly, this is a hot button, right? That somebody with this skill set is not going to be hard to employ. Right. So I know there's a lot of interest. So for someone who wants to go into this line of work, what's your advice for them as far as, what things should they be focusing on? What kind of skills do they need? What should they focus on in school? What kind of companies are out there that are leading kind of the way in this industry?
So I'll say that one of the biggest challenges that I see in the cybersecurity space, there are people who are specifically focused on the security side, like information security side, is that many of them are very technical, but they a lot of times lack the ability to work with other people. So that, I think, that's something the MBA program could actually help them with, right? And there are a lot of different areas within information security. They don't necessarily have to be technical. If you come from a technical background, of course, you have certain advantages because you can understand the technical space much better. But there are other areas like governance, risk control, audit. These are all areas where there are a lot of opportunities. It's just going to keep increasing over time. I'm fairly certain that the unemployment within this space is zero or maybe negative because, I'm fairly certain there are a lot of people who moonlight because there are not enough people in a lot of jobs. So opportunities galore. It's, people, if they have interest in the technical areas, they should look at some of that, or maybe some of these other areas like GRC or audit. They should look at that too. And some of them are a good natural fit for people maybe come from a background with legal or business analysis and project management. So it's a great space to be in.
And if you were just starting out and you needed to be at a place that you really could learn a lot in a short period of time, what kind of companies would you be targeting?
consulting is definitely the best place to be in that way, because I think, alluded to this earlier, where we were talking about, hey, what do small companies do if they have to address some of these cybersecurity issues? A lot of people who come and fill in that gap by providing the service are consulting companies. So being in an organization like that, you learn a lot more. I mean, like very specifically cybersecurity consulting, right? It may not be just the technology side of it. It could, again, be GRC or audit, all of that too. So working with a lot of different companies, understanding their challenges, very quickly you learn so much more than being in a large company and spending many years trying to learn the same thing.
Well, a lot of my students are targeted toward consulting, so they'll be happy to hear that. So that's just a more specific area to go, and one that we know that's going to be growing. It has been so good talking about this topic. I certainly learned a lot. Any last words for our listeners?
No, I think, this is a space that everybody should definitely consider if you haven't already. We talked about this earlier, Lisa. Artificial intelligence, machine learning. You see what ChatGPT can do. Yep. And we talked about some of the challenges that you're seeing yourself. There's a lot of potential within this space. So I think people should, if you haven't considered it, please consider it. There are a lot of opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Between Business and Life, brought to you by the UT Dallas MBA programs. To learn more about how an MBA from the Naveen Jindal School of Management can help you develop the skills and connections you need to live your best life, visit us online at mba.utdallas.edu.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Between Business and Life. Join us online at betweenbusinessandlife.com to find episode notes, links, and more. Be sure to subscribe to Between Business and Life on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcasting app. If you like what you hear, please leave a 5-star review. That will help spread the word about the podcast and UT Dallas MBA programs. To learn more about the UT Dallas MBA programs, visit us online at mba.utdallas.edu.